Hey there, it's Corey with a Send Smarter intervention where we make research-based reading intervention easy. And today I wanted to run through how we teach phonological awareness systematically. So we know that phonological awareness is such an incredibly important piece of developing effective reading and spelling skills. There's been a lot of research that's come out about how important this underlying piece of putting together the entire literacy processing triangle is. So as a reminder, for those of you who have been with us for a while, you know that we love the literacy processing triangle, where essentially we have connections of phonology, so understanding the sound structure of our language, so each of the individual sounds and components of the sound structure of the language. And then we also have orthography, so understanding the visual print. When we see letters, those have meanings and they represent sounds. And then we pull that up to semantics, so tying that all together with meaning. So as we know, phonology is so important in that overall picture of literacy development, so developing reading and writing skills. We really can't effectively read or spell without having these skills intact. And for many students, these skills develop naturally and automatically. It's quick, it's natural, they don't need a lot of explicit instruction. However, for students who have reading or spelling deficits, they do need explicit instruction in phonological awareness, that understanding of that sound structure. And so what we find important is we find it important to make sure that when we're teaching phonological awareness, that we're doing this systematically. So we want to think about each of the different pieces, or really the hierarchy of phonological awareness when we are teaching it. So in our lessons, what we do is we use a 10-part drill. And that 10-part drill is essentially broken down into two 5-part drills. So we have a 10-part drill because we want to make sure that we're hitting each of the phonological awareness tasks on a hierarchy. So starting from the most basic phonological awareness skills and working up to more advanced phonological awareness skills. Because the thing is just like reading and spelling, it's a Jenga tower itself. So phonological awareness itself starts at the bottom and it works its way up, but some students may have holes or gaps in more remedial tasks. And so it's still important that we try to repair that as much as possible. Now, if we're doing a lot of rhyming activities and things like that with some of our older students, they can start to get a little bit resistant. And so what we've done is we just put together the 10-part drill where we just say, before we really jump into our lesson and our new skill, we always start by saying we're going to warm up our ears and then we're going to warm up our eyes for reading or spelling. So when we think about this, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're hitting, again, each of those pieces, and we want to make sure that we're doing it also in order of what we're going to be teaching. So if we're going to be working on reading, we want to give students the ability to understand what sound structure do they need to understand for effective reading. And then before we do spelling or writing, we want to help them understand what sound structure do we need to be prepared for writing. We need students to make that connection, because all too often what happens is we teach phonological awareness, we teach phonics, we teach each of these different pieces, but we do it in isolation. We do it through drills, which is good, we can do that, but we also then need to connect it back and help people, our students, pair it to why does this matter? Why are we even doing this? So often we see students getting this instruction at kindergarten, at first grade. They learn how to clap out their syllables, or they learn how to pinch out their sounds, but they don't really understand how that all comes together or how that supports reading and spelling. So we need to make sure that that's explicit. The other thing that we want to do is, wherever possible, we want to tie our phonological awareness instruction into that literacy processing triangle. So how can we marry that or layer that on top of the orthography, so the visual print structure, and the semantic structure? We know that when we're talking about phonological awareness, we're not talking about letters. We're not talking about looking at words and recognizing the letters. However, the reason that we learn phonological awareness is so that we can make that pairing. So it is important that we start to show students how that works. So for us, what we do in our 10-part drill is we layer that hierarchy of phonological awareness skills onto the orthographic pattern that we're teaching for that week. So for example, if we were teaching CK, if we were going to be teaching the CK spelling rule and we were going to be teaching that orthographic pattern, what we would do is we would take our phonological awareness, our 10-part drill, so the 5-part for reading and the 5-part for spelling, and we would layer that on top of that CK pattern. So I might say something like, do truck and pluck rhyme? And the student would then say, yes, truck and pluck rhyme. Then I might say, what's a word that rhymes with clock? And one of the things that we can do here, if we're trying to tie that semantics piece in, is we could say, what's a real word that rhymes with clock? Because often students have gotten used to the phonological awareness and they might give you, all kinds of different things that aren't actually real words. And so then you can take that as an opportunity to really complete that literacy processing triangle. Maybe what we can get is something like lock or flock or knock. And we can talk about that and we can talk about meaning there. Again, if we're working on phonological awareness, they don't need to be pairing. They don't need to be spelling this. However, if you have students who are more advanced and you're trying to just make sure that you're warming up those ears and you're trying to make sure that that phonological awareness is intact, but they actually are at a higher level, you can have them start to pair that by writing that down. And you can say, or you can write it and you can say, oh, wow, look at what we noticed. That is going to end with a CK. Interesting. Okay, great. What word did these syllables make? Back, pack. And they can get backpack. Oh, that's not there. That goes on the next one. And so what you could do here is if you're going to try and tie in that semantics piece, you could talk about backpack are actually two separate words. It's a compound word that's coming together. Because we only use CK in single syllable words, but now we're seeing it in a multisyllabic word, we would typically see a use of C, just a final C here. And so that's an opportunity to say, well, we've got a compound word. Back has its own meaning, pack has its own meaning, and we combined it together so that we could get extra meaning. So that's where you can pull that semantics piece and that orthographic piece into your phonological awareness. Then what word do these sounds make? S, t, I, k, and they would give you stick. Then you could say, we're going to change the first sound in rock to s. What's our new word? Sock. And those are going to be ways that you're going to prepare for reading. So we've got a hierarchy of rhyme discrimination, understanding whether two words rhyme production, syllable blending, phoneme blending, and then phoneme manipulation is the highest level task there. And if you've got students who are generally doing well, then we want to make sure is happening is we want to make sure that there's automaticity here. So sometimes students can do it, but it's a very labored process, and we want to make sure that this is an automatic process. So that's important too, which is why I always use it as a warm-up, and I just say, we're just going to warm up our ears, but we can use this as an opportunity to pull that literacy processing triangle together. Then, before we get ready for spelling, what we want to do is we want to pull together anything that's going to prepare us for spelling. So again, if we're looking at the CK lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to start at the very basic level and we're going to work our way up for spelling practice. So the first thing is, how many words do you hear in this sentence? The black truck was stuck in the rut. And what you want students to do is to be able to say, the black truck was stuck in the rut. And this one's a little bit easier because you don't have multisyllabic words. But what you'll recognize is sometimes when you start to get multisyllabic words in there, students are actually breaking that up, meaning that when they're spelling, they're actually putting spaces in words that don't belong. Or sometimes you'll even get the other where it's actually two words and students are combining it into one. And so it's important that they can do that. It's also important that they can just repeat back a sentence. oftentimes what happens for students who are struggling to read or who are struggling to spell is that they have difficulty with short-term working memory. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that just in terms of rote memory, can they just repeat back? We want to make sure that we're building that skill up. You'll be surprised at how many students will repeat something back to you that's not what you said. And so then what we need to start to do is we need to start to break that up into a who or what, did what, why, when, or how. So again, we're pulling that semantics piece back in right here to be able to say, okay, repeat my sentence back to me. Remember, the black truck was stuck in the rut. So who or what? The black truck. What did they do? Was stuck. Where? In the rut. And so that way you can start to build that sequencing or that chunking that helps to support that short-term working memory. So while this seems like an easy task, it isn't always. And so we have to be really careful of not just dismissing things because we feel like, no, they've got that. There's a lot of things that could go wrong here. And so it's important to just do it anyway, even though it's the most basic level skill that we have in terms of phonological awareness. Then we look at auditory discrimination. So are the words mock and knock the same or different? In this case, mock and knock are different. What happens is a lot of times we have phonemes that sound very similar. And so these are called minimal pairs, where essentially we're just changing one sound in the word. And it can either be a word that and sound very similar. Those are going to be very commonly mistaken for one another. And I and f are all other good examples of ones that are going to be commonly missed for one another or mistaken for one another. So especially if you have a student who has a speech language deficit or impact, this can be a huge piece, and it definitely impacts spelling because if they hear mock and knock as the same, you might get them spelling it with an because they didn't differentiate between those two sounds. Now, if they can differentiate between those two sounds, that's great, because then if they spell the word incorrectly, you can say, oh, if you spelled knock and the word was mock, I can say mock, knock, same or different, and they'll say different, and they can say which sound is different. Okay, good. Now let's look at the letters that you wrote. What are the letters that we need? And that's where this becomes really, really important. Then we have phoneme isolation. So for example, what's the first sound? What's the second sound? What's the medial sound, the final sound? It doesn't matter, but you do want students to begin to start to isolate and be able to break words into their individual pieces. So in this case, we could say, what's the first sound in struck? And we want to get S. Then we want to start looking at segmenting. So when we're spelling, the biggest thing that we need to be able to do is we need to be able to determine how many syllables are in a word and how many sounds are in a word. Ideally, they're doing some type of scoop spelling or kind of breaking it down so that they can understand that each sound I hear needs to pair to a letter or a letter group. So that's what we're doing with 4 and 5. How many syllables do you hear in brick? 1. So a syllable is just a vowel sound. So it's a word or a part of a word with one vowel sound. And so if students are having a hard time differentiating between syllables and sounds, I can specifically ask, okay, we're listening for syllables. We clap our syllables. We're clapping each vowel sound that we hear in the word. So this is why understanding the difference between vowels and consonants is so important. Then we can say, how many sounds in flock? Okay, if we're looking for how many sounds, we've got f, l, ah, k, flock. And that's exactly what we're doing. So that's our 10-part drill where we've got 5 parts that we're prepping for reading and 5 parts that we're prepping for spelling. And all of this was tied back to that orthographic pattern of CK so that we can more adequately tie together that literacy processing triangle. And then again, wherever we can, we're tying in semantics. Those things cannot happen in isolation. They need to be happening together. Super important. So another thing that you can do, I'm just going to flip here really quick so we can see what else this might look like. So these are what's known as Elkonin boxes, and this is just a really great way for students to practice identifying each of the individual sounds that they hear in words, because this is one of the biggest reasons that we're going to struggle with spelling. And so one of the great things that we can do is we can put pictures, especially if you're working with a student who's struggling with speech sounds or things like that. You can pull pictures that you can just layer right on top of like an Elkonin box, and you can have students differentiate or determine how many sounds are they hearing. So typically we start with 3 sounds, and then we work our way up to 4 sounds, 5 sounds, and beyond. And what we want to do sometimes you may want to use this with a word that only has 3 sounds so that they can recognize, oh, that one didn't actually fill all of the boxes. But it's definitely working from giving them the exact number of boxes that they need so that they can start to recognize that. And then you scaffold. As they get proficient at that, then you give them words that don't fit the exact number of boxes, or you don't give them boxes at all, and you just have them use chips and they move these up so that they can understand each of the individual sounds in those words. So this is great because then what you can do is then you can start pairing, okay, what are the letters that make that sound? And that's how this is really going to all come together for the students. And so if you can start to make sure that you're drawing that connection and making sure that you're explicitly telling them, this is how we read, this is how we spell, that makes a massive, massive difference. So anyway, that's phonological awareness. That's how we teach that systematically. Hopefully that helps. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions, and we're excited to hear about your practices in phonological awareness and how it goes.